Testament has been. Paul hasn't written a whole lot yet about Galatians, about the law, and about grace. The Gospels aren't in pen and circulation yet. So, he is breaking new ground here. So he says, verse 17 and to verse 20, only as the Lord has assigned to each one, and God has called each in this matter, let him walk. So I directed all the churches. Was any man called when he was already circumcised? He is not to become uncircumcised. Has anyone been called in uncircumcision? He is not to be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing. Uncircumcision is nothing. But what matters is the keeping of the commandments of God. Each must remain in that condition in which he was called. He says, don't go let yourself be mutilated because you're now calling yourself a Christian. He's not talking about marriage and divorce anymore. He's talking about circumcision. It was a question that was asked. And it's the first doctrine in the New Testament that is explaining this in detail. He is saying that be circumcised of the heart. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, with all of your strength. That's the new law. That's all that's being talked about here. It has no broader application. It cannot be misapplied without completely skewing the Scriptures. Next subject was slavery. What happens if I'm a slave? Am I going to run away? Am I still bound to this man even though as the slave owner? What do? What about if I'm a slave owner? Do I have to let my slaves go? They might starve to death. What am I supposed to do? Now remember, Paul is now breaking new ground for Christianity. This is the first teaching in writing on these subjects. Slavery, verse 21 to verse 24. Were you called while a slave? Do not worry about it. But if you are able also to become free, rather do that. For he who was called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who was called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, each one is to remain with God in that condition in which he was called. It's not talking about allowing a woman to leave her husband and go chasing the next door neighbor. And if she marries him and then she becomes a Christian, she gets to keep him and she gets to stay away from her real husband. This is not talking about marriage and divorce. This is talking about being a slave. Keep it in context. Don't wrest it out of context. Don't make something said as something which it doesn't. This has nothing to do with the other subjects. This has to do with whether or not to stay a slave or whether or not to stay a master. It is telling people to act like Christians even to their slave owners, and slave owners to act like Christians to their slaves. That's what it's talking about. Thank God for his word. Now let's read on the next subject. To the virgins and betrothed. To the virgins, and he breaks it up. Between virgins, I have no command of the Lord, but I give you an opinion, as one who by the mercy of God is trustworthy. To the males, he writes, I think that this is good in view of the present distress, that it is good for a man, and I want you to remember that, a man to remain as he is. Did you understand that? To the men, he said, I think that this is good in view of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. That was verse 26. Verse 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. He's talking to the betrothed male. Then you read it again. I think that this is good in view of the present distress. It is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? That's talking to the one who is married. Do not seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you married, you have not sinned. He is not talking to the divorced person that they can go and remarry. He is talking to the single male virgin. And now he talks to the female in the second part of verse 28. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Yet such will have trouble in this life, and I am trying to spare you. This is simple. This is easy answers for some very difficult questions. Now, verse 29 to 35, he's talking, do not make romance or things your idol. He has slightly changed subject again. But this I say, brethren, the time has been shortened, so that from now on those who have wives should be as those that do not have one.